Today's Imprint Weekly podcast is brought to you by Accenture. Change is afoot in child welfare. Change that means agencies focus on results for children and keep far more of them safe at home with their own families. Accenture's child welfare team is leading the way in the effort to ensure technology does its part in that success story. Accenture offers cutting-edge case management tools that ensure agencies can see insights that drive decision-making and caseworkers have information they need at their fingertips. Together, these tools help agencies stay laser-focused, reinventing child welfare into a source of strength for families when they need it. For more information, visit www.accenture.com/childwelfare.
Hello and welcome to the Imprint Weekly Podcast. I'm John Kelly, Senior Editor of the Imprint, a daily news site covering child welfare and youth justice around the country. You can read all of our coverage at imprintnews.org or check us out on Facebook or Twitter at the Imprint News. You can also sign up on our homepage for our free weekly and monthly newsletters. And for professionals in child welfare and youth justice, you can subscribe to our Youth Services Insider section for a closer look at news on business, policy, and practice. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is also a member of the SafeCamp Audio Network. Check out our show page and all of SafeCamp Audio's other great podcasts at safecampaudio.org on the web, at SafeCamp Audio on all your social media. On this week's episode, we're going to continue our Summer of SafeCamp Spotlights with Michael D. Davis Thomas, also known as MDDT Speaks, host of the excellent podcast Resilient Voices and Beyond. So we'll talk to Michael a little bit about how he got the idea for the show, some of the poignant moments from the first couple of seasons, and just his thoughts in general on the direction of child welfare. Before we get to that interview, let's run through just a few headlines for this week, and we're going to start with the fact that the largest local child welfare system in the country, Los Angeles County in California, is now on the receiving end of a class action lawsuit that calls the services rendered to older youth who choose to remain in foster care in the county through the age of 21 treacherous. To quote further from this lawsuit, far too often the system designed to protect and safeguard youth's needs exacerbates their trauma as they are cycled through multiple unsuitable placements, lose contact with siblings and other loved ones, and experience abuse and neglect in foster placements. So as anybody that listens to this podcast knows, class action lawsuits in the child welfare realm or even in the juvenile justice realm are nothing new. We've certainly had dozens and dozens of states experience these, counties as well. I think what's a little unique, don't quote me necessarily on this, but I believe this is the first lawsuit that truly just specifically takes aim at a county or state's extended foster care system, right? This litigation is focused, pretty specifically on the youth who elect to remain in care at the age of 18 when, previous to federal and state legislation that extended foster care, that would have been the cutoff date and they would have aged out at 18 into adulthood, now elect to stay in through their 19th, 20th, or even up to their 21st birthday. Just a few examples from, I believe, the 6 youth who are at the core of this litigation seeking a class action certification. Rosie S. is a 20-year-old who is pregnant, had to find a placement in Las Vegas after she was kicked out of transitional housing in Los Angeles County. For 6 months, she had no health insurance and didn't receive any expected parent payments to support herself and her unborn child. So that was one example. Junior R is another one. He was ejected by a housing program for having a messy room. He kind of cycled through a series of short-term, hotel placements, stayed with a grandmother. That didn't work out, and he ended up homeless. And when he became homeless, the Department of Children and Family Services, alleged in the lawsuit, tried to close his case, citing a lack of employment and not having any enrollment in school despite his being homeless. So this is going to be an interesting one in that, again, nobody, I think, has taken specifically aim at seeking relief or improvement in the services that are rendered to youth who choose to stay in extended foster care. And it certainly is going to matter a good deal beyond the borders of Los Angeles County, whose multiple agencies are the named sort of defendants in this case, along with the California Department of Social Services, I'd add. because we're at a point where almost every state has offered some level of extended foster care. About 30 of them have done so with federal support. So there's that federal tie that makes it a little easier for litigation to proceed in a federal court. So we'll have a link to our story, written by Jeremy Loudenbeck, into the show notes here for anybody who wants to read it. And we will certainly be keeping people apprised of this litigation as it moves on, both in print on the imprint and in the podcast as well. I personally have only read Jeremy's great reporting on this. I have not dug all the way into the lawsuit itself, so I may have a few things to add next week if anything jumps out to me. So another one that we will keep tabs on, but I will drop the link to the story that we wrote up about this. Is a pretty complicated one out of Arizona that I'm not entirely sure where this is going to go yet. It's a little complicated to explain, but it involves some undiscovered or unapproved documents that had not made their way appropriately into the case management system of the state and may prompt the reconsideration or review of decisions in thousands of child welfare cases, some of which involved termination of parental rights or actually finalizing and closing out adoptions. All right, so cliff notes here. I have seen this described in some of the local coverage as like a glitchy thing with a case system or a flaw in a system. I would say that it is more of a human error following a conscious decision to create a system in a certain way. So let me try and unroll this. In 2015, I believe, Arizona was one of the first states to take the federal government up on the offer of a fairly significant amount of money to help move its case management system kind of from the archaic past into the modern day. And, it brought in a public consulting group to help design it. I believe it hired Microsoft to kind of lead the build on the system. And this is money that was offered to every state to move from, acronym alert here, the SACWIS system. These were sort of created in the 1990s, largely serve to pipe data and reporting from the state up to the federal government to something that is called a CCWIS, or a Comprehensive Child Welfare Information System. And the whole idea is to adapt better, more modern technology, make your system more modular, and optimize it to kind of do more things for you, help foster kind of communication and information sharing in an appropriate way between the child welfare agency, private providers, lawyers, judges, everybody involved in child welfare cases. And Arizona's was called Guardian. It is called Guardian, and that is their CCWIS system. So at some point along the way, as they were building this system out, somebody decided and instructed the builders to put in a layer of review at the point that a private entity or a private provider or a lawyer was going to upload a document into the case management system. I think the point of doing so would be to say, what if there were, say, two kids with the same name or a parent with the same name? You have people uploading documents. Maybe they are uploading it to the wrong John Kelly, for example. The idea was that this was built with a supervisory requirement that a human being look and approve that a document, basically just click something agreeing this document is going to the right place, and then that sends it to the right place. So had that happened all the time, that supervisors knew to go in and ensure that all the documents were being routed appropriately, no problem, except that, there's high turnover everywhere in the child welfare workforce, things get missed. And as a result of supervisor, people not clicking in and approving every document over several years that this Guardian system has been up and running, there are basically just documents that have never been approved for this portal and thus never have been uploaded to the case file. And the concern here is that cases have proceeded to the point where judges are reviewing things are being discussed and argued in court, and that there might be, in some cases, dozens of documents, and in total, thousands and thousands of documents that are not taken into consideration as those things proceed. And so people are separating families, they're terminating parental rights, they are approving adoptions and guardianship placements without all the facts. Now, the extent to which these documents will actually influence any outcome of any case I have heard is dubious. It may be the case that while these documents were not uploaded in a way where they ended up being approved, a lot of them might be things that judges already saw during the case. It's not a certainty that just because a piece of information or a document was not uploaded in a timely way and approved through the case management system that no judge ever saw it. One example that was kind of given to me by somebody who's kind of in the know on this is there's disclosure forms that a parent might have to fill out at a hearing where there's pretty serious consequences on the table, like a termination of parental rights. A judge would be asking for that disclosure at the time that they were going to rule or hear arguments on something like that. So just the fact that somebody did not correctly get that into the CCWIS system or Guardian after the fact would not necessarily mean that a judge never took it into consideration. But they're going through a review of thousands of documents to make sure that there is nothing there. Kudos to one of the best child welfare reporters in the country, Mary Jo Pitzel, who pointed out this is not the first time this has happened in Arizona. In 2012, a similar situation came up, and that looked, just from her reporting, which I will drop a link to, much worse, like went back from 2012 to something like the mid-1990s. Also from Mary Jo's reporting, I was going to quote her story here. Once cases that lack complete documentation are identified, the Attorney General's office will file a notice with the juvenile court, which will let attorneys who represent children and parents know which of their cases are being reviewed. That is from Kirsten Wright, the chief counsel for the Child and Family Division at the Attorney General's office. So like I said, we'll let you know how this all shakes out or how it's progressing. Already some judges, because the Department of Child Safety and child welfare leaders asked judges to put cases on pause while they sorted this out, like active ongoing cases. A few judges in large counties have already said, no, we're not going to do that necessarily. But yeah, a lot to figure out here still. I would guess, though, that there were probably some state child welfare agency chief information officers who are largely tasked with making sure that the tech is compliant and working in each state, who probably got an email this week after the story came out saying, make sure that we don't have something like this happening with ours. And last thing for this week, I just wanted to take some time to congratulate the imprint's very own Julie Reynolds. She is our assistant editor here at the imprint, for winning in the Breaking Barriers category at this year's Institute for Nonprofit News Awards, or the Innies. She won for her work on the podcast series Afterlife, which was the second series of her already great show, which is called Gray Area. Afterlife explores one man's journey into and then out of California's penal system, the latter part of which might not have happened but for changes over time in the state's view about a second chance for young offenders. It's a very cool series. The person at the center of it, Gilbert Bow, was heavily involved in changing the way that California kind of approached second chances and things like that. So we talked to Julie about the show on the podcast when it was released. I'll drop a link to that interview that we did in the show notes, but even better, just go check out Afterlife. You can find it most easily, shameless plug, on the SafeCamp Audio Network. So if you go to safecampaudio.org/show/gray-area, you can find it there. It's easy. You don't need to know the little suffix. Just go to SafeCamp Audio. It's pretty easy to navigate your way there. Also, congrats to Julie's colleagues, Gilbert Bow and Mara Reynolds, who are both involved in producing that series as well. All right, when we come back, our interview with Michael D. Davis-Thomas, host of Resilient Voices and Beyond.
For 2 decades, Fostering Families Today magazine has educated families raising and supporting children and youth in foster care. Delivered in print or online 6 times each year, Fostering Families Today gives families the latest tips, strategies, and research on caring for children with traumatic backgrounds. Use promo code PODCAST5 to save $5 on a print or digital subscription today. Just go to fosteringfamilies.today.com/subscribe and enter podcast5 to save $5 on your subscription. That's fosteringfamilies.today.com/subscribe.
All right, it is time for another SafeCamp Spotlight interview. All summer, we are bringing in hosts from SafeCamp's inaugural group of member podcasts. You can check out all these podcasts at safecampaudio.org, and we are regularly promoting and featuring their work on social media. You can follow us on any of the big ones at SafeCamp Audio. Today, we have Michael D. Davis Thomas, aka MDDT Speaks, host of Resilient Voices and Beyond. Michael, thank you for joining us on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be here.
So we're going to start with you and then get to the podcast. This is the first question to every guest on the Imprint Weekly Podcast. You're going to have to give me one of your favorites. You could give me more. And here are the categories. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
TV show or movie, sports team, musical group, or book. You don't have to give me all those. You only have to give me one. You can give me more. Michael D. Davis Thomas, what do you got?
Musical group. So this person isn't a musical group, but I definitely would say Lindsey Sterling.
Lindsey Sterling. Okay. Haven't heard of her.
She's a violinist.
Oh.
If you played Halo, I believe she also did a soundtrack on Call of Duty, and different things like that. She actually was on America's Got Talent years ago, didn't win, came back out as a self-published artist. So
very cool. Wow. That is one of the more interesting picks. I'll have to check her out. I like the violin. All right. Describe Resilient Voices and Beyond in 3 sentences or less. What is this show about?
Well, first and foremost, Resilient Voices and Beyond is a show for the voices of individuals with lived experience or childhood trauma or trauma as it is, to showcase their voices that were once silenced, is silenced, or need to be healed. Also, Resilient Voices and Beyond is a neutral space for us to just have the conversations that we're not having, all the time surrounding child welfare issues and resolves. And last but not least, Resilient Voices and Beyond is to showcase the beyond. A lot of times we do not have that place to share where people go after this, not just the social workers, not just the individuals who live experience, but the after, the people who are thriving.
When did you decide to start a podcast, and how did it come about? I mean, what planted the seed for you to check into this medium?
Throughout my whole experience of advocacy, I have to be honest with you guys, there definitely has been that kind of like imposter syndrome, and I always I will walk around with these ideas, even in my iPhone notes right now, I have 57 books ironed out, and outlines and layouts that I've started when I was in placement. And I never would act on these ideas because I'm who am I? I'm an individual with no degree, whole bunch of certifications, worked many different jobs, have been advocating, but there's so many other people out there that could do this. Mm-hmm. And for me, coming out of COVID, having worked for several other, nonprofits, doing many different positions in child welfare. At that time, I believe it was 8 or 9 years that I have spent in the child welfare space. I was at this crossroads where I felt I heard an internal voice for me. I also felt like it was God telling me look, you need to just start. I didn't really have any know-how. I think I asked around to a couple people who I came across through my work that had podcasts, what were price points and different things like this, and what did that look like? Because at that point, advocacy was kind of my I guess you would say my full paying job. I was doing things, but that was my full paying job. I was doing this, that, and the third. So I'm I can't really afford a podcast, because in my mind, I thought this would be hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this. And I just stopped overthinking it and just started to do it, and started with trying to find the place to upload, the place to record, and just did it off my laptop. I knew it wasn't going to be as polished. I'm pretty sure in season 1 there's a cough or a sneeze in there and one of those episodes, but I just stepped out on faith, took that risk because I felt as though this is something I was called to do. I felt I needed to stop running from what God, was telling me. This is something that I needed to do. So I just started to do it slowly but surely. People started coming to it. I think I had spent years trying to connect with people, network with people when I would go to conferences and everything. So I was just all right, now I'm stepping out and doing this. Let me just phone in all these contacts I've made through all the
Right.
years. Like, look, so I started this podcast. I would love you to be a part. And what I really loved and I really appreciate for all the guys that are out there listening that were on season 1, season 2, I really appreciate you guys because it was now no hesitation. They're like, Michael, you've done so much, we would love to give back and help you out, and I'm really appreciative of that.
Let's talk about influences in the podcast world. I mean, do you have particular podcasts that you listen to that kind of help shape how you come about this? Any other shows you'd recommend to
Yeah.
people?
I definitely listen to the Imprint,
No, don't say us.
I listen to the Imprint. I listen to Fostering Success Michigan podcast, and then I forget it. I think it's just FSM podcast, and then they also had a Lens one for a little bit of time. I listen to a couple, and not just in this space of work. I'm a big motivational listener, so I listen to TED Talks. I listen to YouTube pastors speaking and different things like that. My favorite is Transformation Church, Pastor Mike Todd. Like I listen to him because I like how he delivers the message. I like how he provides examples. So, for me, my goal is to be able to touch one person or maybe touch thousands, so I'm trying to do my best job, not to be scripted, but to be authentic in my truth and figure out better ways that I can, share and uplift and provide outreach to this community.
So I'm not going to make you alienate any particular guest by asking you for a favorite episode. We're not going to do that. Instead, I'll ask it this way. Which episode of Resilient Voices and Beyond so far stands out to you as like a particularly embodying what you're trying to do with this show? Like I'm sure one or two really stick out as like, that is what I've been trying to accomplish with this.
So I think there's a couple, but for me, coming out, I just did a keynote and coming out of, just coming to do that, I think specifically somebody can talk about how I said that, but I did a podcast, I think it was season 2, where I recorded with my former life skills coach in my independent living placement when I was a youth. And I think that one stands out the most to me because I'm able to bring my life, my experience for those youth that may come across this podcast and listen to me like, okay, who is this person out here talking or what have you? How can they be prevalent or relevant to myself? And they can take a listen to that episode and see and hear the truth. In that episode, I talk about how I was a pilot kid for an independent living program. And because I was a pilot kid, there was not a lot of room for me to mess up. So like I had to be like perfection. And the life skills coach, as a person who worked for it, he's not like, neither one of us are bashing the organization, but we're sharing the truth, because I know I'm not the only one that goes through it. He's just kind of attesting from his side point of view of what that experience was watching me having to go through that. And then as I aged out, I talked about how because I didn't have that room not to be a positive peer, because I didn't have that room, because I was quote unquote what caseworkers would call not a problem child on their case, a lot of that institutionalization, that pushback of thoughts, impulses flooded when I officially was out on my own. And I did not fail safely. I failed hard and had to learn some really hard lessons. So I think that episode really stands out to me and is with Darius Petway. And now I believe he runs a school out on Texas, just motivating youth on different things like that. But, I think he was in college as he was my life skill coach. And he is one of the few African-American males that I had to kind of like look at. But at that time, I'll be honest, like I was at a place where I wasn't trying to hear what nobody was trying to say. Like I was trying to get what I had to get done. I was very much in survival mode. And it took me a minute to see all the little different seeds and all the different crumbs that people had dropped in my life to make that loaf of bread.
That was a good episode. I'm biased, but I think my favorite is probably when you interviewed my colleague here at Fostering Media Connections, Deborah Denzel, because it was really cool to just hear her, chop it up with you and tell her story. So you've had all these like rich interviews with people from all different parts of the system. Young people have experienced it, all these different states. So I think you're just a good person to ask this kind of big picture question to. what are you most optimistic about when it comes to child welfare right now? Like the moment we're in compared to maybe when you were experiencing the system, and what are you most concerned about? So good and bad. What keeps you up at night about this stuff, and what are you most optimistic about the path we're on?
So for me, what I'm most optimistic about is the people. We have people who are willing, and I just said this at the keynote. I said, well, people that are willing to take charge, take action, and own their now. And that's not just people with lived experience. That's the stakeholders. That's the community leaders. That's the directors. That's the legislators, senators, the youth. That's everyone that has a part to play within the system as we know it. And a lot of these individuals are at a place of sick and tired. And if anybody know or anyone who's listening has been to that place of sick and tired, it doesn't have to necessarily be something like really awfully bad, but you're just tired of things being how they are and just getting, I don't want to say excuses, but getting very dull answers to why we can't. And I'm a person, I've been doing this advocating activist work surrounding not only just the child welfare systems, but also the systems that encompass it: education, criminal justice, juvenile justice, LGBTQ, and many other sectors that I advocate amongst. And just seeing how there's very little change from when I came out. And I'm 25 now. Okay, I ended up officially, being in a placement at 18. I did extended foster care into 21, but it's as traumatic seeing that there's very little change. So I'm very optimistic because we have people in power now within states as directors, within the Senate and the House, who are adamant and vocal. We didn't used to see that vocalization years ago, and they're very unapologetic. But what keeps me up at night is that we still have a huge body of people who don't really know what foster care is. And I feel like that ignorance, not in a negative way, but that ignorance is a huge part of why our system stays in this stagnated place. Yes, we have made strides, but a lot of the strides we have had is like putting a Band-Aid on a deep wound. They're not changes that may be a turn of the century of what we see in the system. And I'm not saying that anything that has been done to speak about, a couple of things. Now we have a FYI voucher that is specifically for foster youth. That is great. That is something tremendous. But also we're still seeing homelessness because it's not enough of them.
Sure.
So, and then now we have the Family First, which is now putting more structure in some states on residential treatment. But also we implemented it, but now these kids are homeless within the system and having to sleep in, caseworker buildings and juveniles because they don't have no place to stay, or because juveniles, unfortunately, which I think is a really good thing, but also I don't think it was a contingency build, they can't really restrain anymore. So a lot of them aren't taking high risk kids who have behavior issues because they don't want to be put in a liability situation, and which is real. So it's not, and a lot of people laugh because they're like, Michael, you're not supposed to have these two-way thought process. And I'm like, I understand for both sides because I've worked as a youth worker within residentials and in juveniles, and I have lived experience. So I see both sides of the issue, but it does keep me up at night because we have to start thinking deeper and more out of the box about some of these solutions towards prevention and preservation of the family. And that may mean investing early on in our communities, in our libraries, in our families. I think I spoke about on one of my episodes, and a couple of them actually, about remembering when I was younger and there being a kind of village mindset on my block. Everybody was working a minimum wage job or less, and everybody was impoverished on my block growing up. Everyone had their issues, and it wasn't perfect. Some greater, some less, And I remember when someone would go through something, individuals would come together, either watch your kids or bring a box of like canned goods. From in my state, we had Focus Hope. So it's like for individuals who had WIC or EBT, they can go to the specific store, get the canned goods that just, it was grape juice, but it just said grape juice. It was no brand picture on it,
Purple drink. Yeah.
Yeah, and they would bring these things together and offer of support what they could. And I'm like, what if we took that up as a nation, as a state, as a community, and worked outside of selfless means to really help our community build up and not just focus on the crisis at hand, but focus on the more bigger picture of our communities. Because if we build up our communities, there will be less of a need for individuals to come and care.
His name is Michael D. Davis Thomas. He is the host of Resilient Voices and Beyond. Michael, thank you so much for joining us on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks to Michael D. Davis Thomas for joining us today. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is a production of the SafeCamp Audio Network, which is a division of Fostering Media Connections. Please visit safecampaudio.org on the web or SafeCamp Audio on all major social media. This podcast is produced and mixed by Christine Onjoko with music by Luke Giroux and Cyrus Elia. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you consider subscribing or giving us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. And we'd greatly appreciate if you consider supporting our work here on the podcast and in print. Small donations from our listeners and readers go a long way towards helping us grow and cover more great stories in child welfare and youth justice. To support us, very easy. Just visit imprintnews.org/donate. You can follow The Imprint on Twitter and Facebook by searching the handle @TheImprintNews and visit us on the web at imprintnews.org. And you can always reach us over email at tips@imprintnews.org. I'm John Kelly, and we'll see you next week.